There's a piece of advice old-timers give you when you move to Garo, Illinois. They don't put it in the welcome packet, and the realtor won't mention it during the tour. But at some point, a neighbor, usually the quiet one, the one who doesn't make small talk, will find you alone. And they'll say, if you're driving after midnight, don't trust your memory, trust the road. I didn't know what that meant for a long time. I thought it was local color. Some leftover folkway from when the town was just a farming crossroads and county highways had no lights and no signs, a quaint Midwestern way of saying, be careful at night. And I smiled and thanked the woman who told me, Mrs. Padam, 68 years old, retired postal worker, carnations in the window box, and I forgot about it almost immediately. That was my first mistake. Not because something terrible happened right away. That's not how Garo works. It doesn't punish you for ignorance. It just waits patiently. The way a river waits for winter to end, and then one night, you're driving home from somewhere ordinary, and the road you've taken 1,000 times bends in a direction it shouldn't. And you feel it, this slow, sick lurch in your gut, and you realize you don't know where you are, even though you haven't left town. My name is Elliot Marsh. I'm 41 years old. I work as an infrastructure surveyor for County Public Works, which means I measure roads for a living. I calculate grades, drainage angles, asphalt depth, shoulder widths. I catalog every crack, every pothole, every guardrail and culvert in a 3-county area. And I'm telling you this, all of it, from the beginning, because I need someone outside of Garo to understand what happens here. Not because I think you'll believe me. Belief isn't the point. The point is that once I say it, once this exists somewhere outside the borders of this town, maybe it becomes real in a way that Garo can't quietly rearrange. Maybe. I moved here in 2017. My wife, Nora, had taken a position at the regional veterinary clinic, and the town was exactly the kind of place we'd always talked about settling into. Population just under 4,000. A main street with a hardware store, a bakery, a library that still had a card catalog, not for charm, but because no one had gotten around to replacing it. The houses were old but solid. Clapboard siding, deep porches, yards that stretched back into tree lines without fences. We found a 2-bedroom Cape Cod on Alden Road, 3 blocks from the elementary school, 5 minutes from the highway on-ramp. The previous owners had left behind a rain gauge in the garden and a pencil mark on the kitchen door frame measuring some child's height at various ages. It felt inherited. It felt like a place that had already been loved. I want you to hold on to that feeling, that warmth, that sense of arrival, because it's real. It doesn't stop being real just because of what I'm about to tell you. Garo is a good town. I need you to understand that. The people are decent. The summers are long and gold green. The tap water tastes clean. But the roads change after midnight, and no one can tell me why. The survey. The first time I noticed something off, it was a Tuesday in late September, my second autumn in Garo. I'd been assigned a routine pavement evaluation on Duluth Street, a residential collector road, 2 lanes, no center line, running east to west between the grain elevator and the water tower. I'd driven it 100 times. I could have described it to you with my eyes closed. Gentle uphill grade heading east. A slight rightward curve near the Methodists' parking lot. 4 stop signs, no signals. I ran my survey on a Wednesday afternoon, full daylight, clear weather. I logged every measurement into my field tablet. Length 1.34 miles. Pavement width 22 feet, standard stuff. The following Monday, my supervisor, Rick Calburn, flagged the report. He called me into his office, a glorified closet in the county annex with a coffee maker from 1994 and a poster of the Illinois road classification system that had been taped to the wall so long it had become part of it. Elliot, your Duluth Street numbers are off. Off how? Length. You've got it at 134. It's 1.18. Always has been. I told him I'd remeasured. He told me not to bother, just correct the report and move on. He said it gently. Not like I'd done something wrong, but like I'd done something expected. Like this was a conversation he'd had before. I corrected the report, but that night I lay in bed doing the math in my head. 1.34 miles versus 1.18 miles. That's a difference of about 845 feet. 845 feet of road. That doesn't just vanish, that doesn't round away. That's almost the length of 3 football fields. Either my equipment was wrong or the road had been longer on Wednesday than it was on the official record. I didn't say anything to Nora. She was deep into a complicated case, a horse with a jaw abscess, and she came home each night smelling like antiseptic and looking like she needed sleep more than conversation. So I kept it to myself. I told myself it was instrument error, a calibration issue, something boring and fixable. But I went back to Duluth Street the next Wednesday, same time, same conditions, and I measured again, 1.34 miles, exactly the same. I sat in my truck at the end of the road and stared at the number on the screen. Then I pulled up the county GIS database on my phone and looked at the official record. 1.18 miles. I drove the road slowly, counting driveways. 14. I went home and checked the plat map. 14 driveways, the right number of houses, the right number of intersections, the right curve near the church. Everything was exactly where it should be. There was just more of it, more space between things, as if the road had inhaled and not yet breathed out. That was the night I first drove through Garrow after midnight. Not on purpose. Nora had an emergency call, a dog hit by a car on a farm outside town, and I'd stayed up waiting for her. By 12:15 I was restless, so I grabbed my keys and decided to do a loop, just a drive, the kind of aimless window-down circuit you do when your brain won't quiet and the house feels too still. I took Alden to Park, Park to Main, Main to the roundabout by the fire station. Normal. Everything was normal. The streetlights hummed their amber frequency. The storefronts were dark. A raccoon ambled across the road near the bakery like it was paying property taxes. Then I turned onto Duluth Street, and it was longer. I could feel it before I confirmed it. The drive between the stop sign at Walnut and the curve near the church took longer than it should have. Not dramatically, maybe 20 extra seconds. But I drive for a living. I know how long a road takes. I slowed down and watched the odometer. When I reached the end of Duluth, the trip counter read 1.51 miles. 1.51 longer than my Wednesday measurements. Longer than anything in the county records. The road had grown. I sat at the stop sign at the eastern terminus and looked in my rearview mirror. Duluth stretched back into the darkness behind me, lit only by the occasional porch light. It looked the same. Every house was where it should be. But the intervals, the darkness between the lights, felt wider, like someone had taken a photograph and gently stretched it at the edges. I drove home. I didn't measure anything else. I pulled into the driveway, turned off the engine, and sat in the dark for a while. The night was very quiet. That's a detail that matters more than I understood at the time. Suffrageable. I want to tell you about the next few weeks slowly, because that's how they happened. Garrow doesn't rush anything. The notebook. I started keeping a log. Not in any official capacity. I wasn't about to put roads maybe changing length at night into a county database. I bought a graph paper notebook from the hardware store and began recording measurements. Every few days I'd pick a road and survey it twice, once during the afternoon, once after midnight. I kept my methodology consistent. Same equipment, same starting and ending landmarks, same vehicle speed for the odometer crosschecks. Within 3 weeks I had data on 11 roads. During the day, every single one matched the county records. Exactly, down to the 100th of a mile. My equipment was not malfunctioning. My methodology was clean. After midnight, 9 of the 11 were different. Not all of them were longer. That was the first surprise. Hessler Road, which runs along the southern edge of town past the old rail depot, was consistently shorter by about 600 feet after midnight. Birch Lane, a quiet cul-de-sac in the northeast quadrant, oscillated. Some nights it was 200 feet longer. Other nights it matched the daytime measurement exactly. The changes weren't random, though. They weren't chaotic. When I plotted the data, patterns emerged. Roads running east-west tended to lengthen. Roads running north-south tended to shorten or stay the same. And the magnitude of the change seemed tied to the calendar, specifically to the phase of the moon. Although I resisted that conclusion for a long time because it felt ridiculous. It felt like the kind of thing a person invents when they're looking too hard for meaning. But the data was clean. I checked it again. During the waning crescent, the last thin sliver before a new moon, the changes were most extreme. Duluth Street hit 1.73 miles one night during a waning crescent in October, nearly half a mile longer than its official length. I drove it twice just to be sure, crawling along at 15 miles an hour with my headlights cutting through fog, and both passes gave me the same number. The road was simply bigger. I need to pause here and describe what this felt like, because the numbers alone don't capture it. When you're on a road that's longer than it should be, you don't immediately think the road has changed. You think I'm going the wrong way. I missed a turn. I'm confused. Your brain generates perfectly reasonable explanations and offers them to you like a waiter presenting a menu. Pick one, anyone. Because the alternative, that the physical infrastructure of your town is not fixed, is not a thought your mind is equipped to have casually. But when you've driven Duluth Street 300 times and you know in your body, in the part of your brain that maps space without thinking, that the church should be here by now, and it isn't, and you're still driving through that same gentle curve in the church, just not arriving. It's a quiet kind of fear. It doesn't spike, it seeps. It's the feeling of trusting the ground under you and having that trust go unanswered. I told Nora on a Sunday morning in early November. We were eating breakfast. She was reading a veterinary journal. The house smelled like toast and coffee, and that particular cool, woody scent that comes through old windows when the first frost hasn't quite landed yet. I think something unusual is happening with the roads, I said. She looked up. Not alarmed, curious. Nora has this way of holding her face very still when she's deciding how to respond, like she's taking a patient's pulse and doesn't want to influence the reading. Unusual how? Their lengths change at night. She didn't laugh. She didn't tell me I was imagining things. She set down her journal and said, "Show me the data." I loved her very much in that moment. Not because she believed me, I don't think she did, not yet, but because she asked for evidence instead of reassurance. She treated it as a question worth examining, not a symptom worth worrying about. I showed her the notebook. She went through it page by page, running her finger along the columns. She asked about methodology. She asked about instrument calibration. She asked if temperature variation could affect the odometer, which was actually a reasonable question. Tire pressure changes with temperature, which affects rolling circumference, which affects distance readings. I'd already accounted for it. When she finished, she closed the notebook and sat with it for a moment. "This is very thorough," she said. "Yeah. You want me to come with you tonight? Would you?" Of course. That night, we drove Duluth Street together at 12:40 in the morning. The trip counter read 1.41 miles. Nora watched it the entire time. She didn't say anything until we were back home, standing in the kitchen, the notebook open on the counter between us. "That was too long," she said quietly. "Yeah. It shouldn't be that long." "No." She picked up a pen from the cup by the phone and added a notation to my log in her small, precise handwriting. Confirmed. 2 observers, clear conditions, no odometer anomaly suspected. Then she signed it, like it was a medical chart. We stood there for a while in the kitchen light. Outside, the town was silent. "Has this always happened?" she asked. "I don't know. Have you asked anyone?" And that's when I remembered Mrs. Padham. Don't trust your memory, trust the road. What she told me rearranged everything I thought I understood. Eleanor Padham lived alone in a small yellow house on Locust Street with a covered porch and a storm door that had a rooster decal on it. She answered my knock within seconds, like she'd been standing right there, and she looked at me with an expression that I can only describe as patient recognition. Not surprise, not confusion. The face of someone who'd been expecting a particular knock for a long time and was almost relieved it had finally come. "You've been measuring," she said. It wasn't a question. She invited me in. The house was warm and smelled like lavender and old paper. There was a grandfather clock in the hallway that ticked with the deep, unhurried authority of something that had never once been wrong. She led me to the kitchen, where she made coffee in a stovetop percolator without asking if I wanted any. And then she sat down across from me at a table covered with a checkered cloth and said, "Tell me what you found." I told her everything. The measurements, the discrepancies, the east-west pattern, the lunar correlation. She listened without interrupting, both hands wrapped around her coffee mug, and when I finished, she nodded once, slowly, like I'd recited something she already knew by heart. "How long has this been happening?" I asked. "Since before I was born. Since before anyone I've ever spoken to was born. And people just know, and don't talk about it?" "People talk about it," she said. "Just not the way you're thinking. Not with data and measurements. They talk about it the way you talk about weather or the way the creek floods in spring. It's a condition of living here. You adapt." She got up and opened a drawer, not a cabinet, a drawer. built into the underside of the kitchen table itself, which I hadn't noticed, and pulled out a stack of papers, hand-drawn maps, dozens of them. Each one depicted Garrow, but each one was subtly different. Roads curved where I expected them to be straight. Intersections appeared a block north or south of where they should be. Some maps had roads I'd never seen. Others were missing roads I drove every day. My mother drew these, Mrs. Padam said. Every Saturday morning for 31 years, she'd wake up at dawn, drive every road in town, and draw what she found. She said it was the only way to keep track. I picked up one of the maps. It was dated March 14, 1968. The handwriting was careful and feminine, and the map was detailed. Not just roads, but landmarks, tree lines, the shape of the creek where it passed under Route 9. And in the bottom corner, a small notation, waning crescent, maple absent between 3rd and 5th, returned by dawn. Absent, I said. Some roads don't just change length, some of them leave. I looked at her. Not often, she added. And they come back. They always come back, usually by morning. But during certain nights, dark moon nights mostly, a road might just not be there. You'll drive to where it should begin and find a tree line or a field or someone's backyard, and there's no indication a road ever existed in that spot. And then the next morning, there it is again as if nothing happened. That's not possible. No, she agreed, it isn't. She let that sit between us for a moment. My mother believed the town was alive, Mrs. Padam said. Not in a metaphorical sense. She believed the land itself, the ground, the earth beneath the asphalt, had some kind of slow, geological awareness. She thought the roads were like capillaries, and at night when the town was quiet and the human activity stopped pressing down, the land rearranged itself, shifted, breathed. Not to hurt anyone, not with intent, just the way a sleeping body adjusts itself during the night. Do you believe that? She took a long sip of coffee. The grandfather clock ticked in the hallway. I believe the roads change, she said. I've seen it my whole life. As for why, she set down her mug. I stopped needing a reason about 40 years ago. Reasons are for things that might stop happening. This isn't going to stop. I asked her if anyone had ever been harmed, if the changing roads had ever trapped someone or led someone astray or caused an accident. Her face shifted, not dramatically. Just a slight tightening around the eyes, a pulling inward that made me think of a curtain being drawn across a window. Not quickly, but deliberately. There are rules, she said. Not written ones. Things people have figured out over time, things that get passed along. Like what you told me when I moved in about trusting the road. That's the first one, and the most important. If you're driving at night and the road goes somewhere you don't expect, don't fight it, don't try to correct, don't turn around. Follow the road wherever it takes you. It will bring you somewhere you recognize eventually. What happens if you don't? If you turn around? You get confused. The road behind you might not be the road you just drove. You can end up circling for hours. My husband, Gerald, she paused, opened her mouth, closed it, took a breath. Gerald was a stubborn man, practical. Didn't like things he couldn't explain. One night in 1989, he was driving home from his brother's place, just a 10-minute drive, nothing complicated, and the road diverged, went left where it should have gone straight. He refused. He turned around. Then the road behind him went right where it should have gone straight. So he turned around again, and again. How long? I found him at 6 in the morning. Parked on the shoulder of a road neither of us had ever seen before, about 2 miles outside town in a direction I still can't identify on any map. He was just sitting there with the engine off, staring straight ahead. He said he'd been driving for 5 hours. The odometer showed over 200 miles. 200 miles inside Garrow? Inside something. She looked down at her mother's maps. Gerald never drove after dark again. Not once in the remaining 23 years of his life. He'd stay home, or he'd stay wherever he was until dawn. He never spoke about that night, and I never pressed him. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, I'd wake up and find him standing at the bedroom window, looking out at Locust Street, watching it like you'd watch an animal you didn't trust. I sat with that for a long time. The kitchen was very quiet. Somewhere outside, a bird sang a fragment of a song and then stopped, as if it had forgotten the rest. You said there were rules, I said. Plural. What else? Mrs. Padam held up her fingers and counted them off. Follow the road. That's 1. 2. Don't measure at night. Not officially. Not with county equipment, not with GPS, not with anything that creates a record. The town, and I know how this sounds, the town doesn't like being documented after dark. The changes get worse when people try to pin them down. More extreme, more frequent. My mother kept her maps because she drew them the next morning from memory. She never brought a pencil in the car. She looked at me carefully. "You've been measuring at night with equipment. Yes, you need to stop." Something in her voice made the coffee in my stomach go cold. "What's the third rule?" I asked. "3," she said, and her voice dropped, not to a whisper, but to something underneath a whisper. "The way you speak when you're telling someone something true that you've carried for a very long time. Don't follow a road that isn't there during the day. If you're driving after midnight and you come to an intersection you don't recognize or a road you've never seen, don't take it. It doesn't matter how curious you are. It doesn't matter if it seems to go somewhere important. New roads at night are not for you." "Who are they for?" She looked at me the way a mother looks at a child who's asked where people go after they die, not with condescension, but with the particular grief of knowing the honest answer isn't adequate. "I don't know," she said, "but they're not for us. Verfraugjig. I wish I could tell you I listened. I wish I could tell you I put the notebook away and the equipment back in the truck and lived quietly in Garrow like everyone else, measuring only in daylight, driving only when the sun was up. But I'm a surveyor. The thing I do, the thing I've built my professional life around, is quantifying the shape of the world. And I had discovered that the shape of the world wasn't fixed. I couldn't just walk away from that. I compromised, or I told myself I did. I stopped using the electronic equipment at night. No more field tablet, no more GPS logger, no more odometer checks. But I kept driving, and I kept observing, and I kept writing things down in the notebook. After I got home, from memory, just like Mrs. Padham's mother. A loophole, a rationalization, the kind of bargain you make with a thing you don't fully understand. November turned cold and gray. The trees along the residential streets dropped their leaves, and the town took on that skeletal, honest quality that Midwestern towns get in late autumn when there's nothing left to hide behind. Nora and I fell into a rhythm. She worked long hours at the clinic. I did my surveys during the day and my drives at night, usually between midnight and 2, always following the same loose route. Alden to Park, Park to Main, Main to the roundabout, then a loop through the residential grid before heading home. The roads changed. Every night they changed. Not every road, not every time, but enough that I began to develop an intuition for it. I could feel when a road was longer than it should be. Something about the headlight pattern on the asphalt, the way the light traveled ahead of me, felt different, stretched, like the photons were taking longer to reach their destination. I followed Mrs. Padham's first rule faithfully. When a road bent wrong, I went with it. When a familiar intersection seemed to have drifted half a block north, I adjusted. The roads always brought me somewhere I recognized. It usually took a little longer than expected, but I always ended up on a street I knew, under a streetlight I'd seen before, with my bearings intact. It was almost peaceful. And then, on the night of November 28th, a new moon, the sky absolutely black, I found the road. I was on Hessler, heading south past the old rail depot. The depot is a landmark I've used 1,000 times. A long, low building with a corrugated metal roof and a loading dock that faces the street. It's been unused for decades but never demolished, and it sits at the intersection of Hessler and County Road 4, which leads out of town to the east. Except that night, County Road 4 wasn't there. In its place was a road I'd never seen. It was narrower than County Road 4. No center line, no fog line, no shoulder. Just asphalt, old dark asphalt with a surface texture that looked almost hand-laid, disappearing into the darkness between 2 rows of trees that I didn't recognize. Not the oaks and maples that line most of Garrow's streets. These were taller, denser. Their canopy closed overhead like a cathedral ceiling, blocking even the faint ambient glow of the sky. I stopped at the intersection. My headlights illuminated perhaps 60 feet of this new road before the darkness swallowed them entirely. Don't follow a road that isn't there during the day. Mrs. Padham's third rule, clear and unambiguous. I knew it. I heard it in her voice. I felt the weight of Gerald's 200 phantom miles pressing against the inside of my chest. I sat at that intersection for 4 minutes. I counted them on the dashboard clock. During those 4 minutes, I became aware of something, a sound, Not a sound exactly, more like the negative space where a sound should be. The total, complete absence of ambient noise. No wind, no insects, no distant highway drone. No dogs. No furnace hum from the depot, nothing. A silence so thorough it had texture, like velvet pressed against both ears simultaneously. And within that silence, just barely, so faintly that I still question whether I actually perceived it or simply imagined it into being something like breathing. Long, slow, enormous breathing, the kind of breathing a building would do, or a hillside, or a body of water, not coming from any direction, coming from the road itself. I put the car in gear. I turned onto the new road. I know, but I need you to understand. I'm a person who measures things. I spent my entire adult life quantifying the physical world. And here was a road that existed only in darkness, only during a new moon, and it was breathing. My curiosity wasn't casual, it was existential. If I didn't drive that road, I would spend the rest of my life wondering what was on it. And I knew with certainty that the wondering would be worse than the knowing. The road went straight for a while. My headlights cut a narrow corridor through the overhanging trees. The asphalt was smooth, smoother than any road I'd surveyed in the county. No cracks, no patches, no utility cuts. It looked new. It looked like it had been laid that night for me. After about a quarter mile, the trees thinned and the road began to curve, gently at first, then more significantly, winding through what appeared to be open farmland, although I couldn't see far in the darkness. The land was flat, featureless. No farmhouse lights, no silos, no fencing. Just flat black earth extending in every direction, with the road curving through it like a river. I checked the clock. 12:53. I checked the odometer. I'd gone 1.2 miles from the intersection. The road curved again, and my headlights swept across something standing at the roadside. I braked. Not hard, there was no danger. Nothing in my lane, but the sight of it stopped me. It was a mailbox. A standard rural mailbox on a wooden post, the kind you see on every farm road in Illinois. Dark green, slightly rusted. The flag was up. There was no house, no driveway, no indication that any structure had ever existed near this mailbox. It stood alone in the flat black landscape like a single tooth in an empty mouth. I sat there idling, staring at it. My headlights made the green paint look sickly, almost luminescent. The flag cast a thin shadow across the road. I don't know why I did what I did next. I've thought about it constantly, and I still can't reconstruct the decision-making process. It wasn't courage. It wasn't recklessness. It was something closer to obligation, as if the mailbox had been placed there specifically for me, and ignoring it would be a kind of rudeness. I got out of the car. The silence outside was even more profound than it had been through the windows. I could hear my own heartbeat, my own breathing, the faint creak of my jacket as I moved. The air was cold but perfectly still, no wind at all. The ground next to the road was bare earth, not frozen, not muddy, just dry, packed earth like the floor of a cellar. I walked to the mailbox. I opened it. Inside was a single envelope, white, no stamp, no return address. The center, in handwriting I did not recognize, was my name, Elliot Marsh. I held it for a moment. The paper was cold, colder than the air, which shouldn't have been possible. It felt heavy for a single envelope, not with physical weight, but with a kind of gravitational significance, like holding a key when you don't know which door it opens. I put it in my jacket pocket. I got back in the car. I kept driving. The road continued for another mile, curving gently. And then, without drama, without transition, it emptied onto Hessler Road, exactly where County Road 4 should have been. The rail depot was on my left. The streetlight at the intersection was humming its amber hum. Garrow was around me again, familiar and solid and real. I looked in the rearview mirror. Behind me, Hessler Road continued south, perfectly normal. No dark road, no cathedral trees, no flat black farmland, gone, as if it had closed behind me like a mouth. I drove home. I parked. I sat in the driveway. Then I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. On it, in the same unfamiliar handwriting, was a list of dates, just dates. No explanation, no heading, no context. March 3, 1952, October 17, 1968, June 8, 1974, January 12, 1983, April 29, 1989, November 28, 2019. 6 dates. The last one was tonight. I stared at the list for a long time. Then I folded the paper, put it back in the envelope, and went inside. Nora was asleep. I placed the envelope in the drawer of my nightstand and lay down next to her and listened to the sound of her breathing until my heartbeat slowed enough to sleep. In the morning, the first thing I did was open the drawer. The envelope was still there. The paper was still inside. The dates were still written on it. This was real. The dates. I couldn't stop thinking about the dates. They had to mean something, a pattern, a record, a warning. I spent the next 2 weeks trying to find out what had happened on each one. I started at the library. Garrow's Library is a squat brick building on the corner of Main and 3rd, built in 1937 and expanded once in 1971 with an addition that never quite matched the original. The librarian, a man named Harold Priss, who'd held the position for 30 years, kept an immaculate local history collection in the basement, old editions of the Garrow Courier, town council minutes, church bulletins, school yearbooks, agricultural records, boxes of unsorted photographs donated by families over the decades. I told Harold I was researching local history for a personal project, which was true in a way that omitted every important detail, and he gave me access to the basement without question. I think he was genuinely pleased that someone was interested. He brought me coffee twice and a sandwich once without being asked. I started with the dates. March 3, 1952. I pulled the Courier from that week. The front page covered a county zoning dispute. Local news section. A barn fire on a property south of town. No injuries, cause undetermined. Obituaries, none. Nothing remarkable. But on page 6, a small item, barely 3 column inches, road crew reports anomaly on Route 9. The article, written in the clipped, factual tone of small-town journalism, described a county road crew that had arrived for a scheduled repaving of a section of Route 9, only to find that the road surface they'd intended to replace appeared to be brand new, fresh and unblemished, according to the foreman. The article quoted a county engineer saying the observation was likely a paperwork error, and the section had probably been repaved earlier than scheduled. October 17, 1968. This one was in Mrs. Padam's mother's maps. I'd seen the date in the margin of one of the drawings. I went back to Mrs. Padam's house and asked to look at it again. The map from that date showed Garrow with Maple Street missing between 3rd and 5th, the notation I'd seen before. But there was an addition I hadn't noticed the first time. In the upper right corner in tiny handwriting, New Road, south of Depot, gone by morning. F found something there, won't say what. F, a single initial. I asked Mrs. Padam who F was. My Aunt Florence, she said. My mother's sister. She lived here too, in the 70s. She was curious, like you. What did she find? She never said. My mother asked her once, and Florence just shook her head and said, "It knows our names, Doris. That's all." She moved away the following year, went to Wisconsin, didn't come back until the funeral. It knows our names. I thought of the envelope in the mailbox, my name written in handwriting I'd never seen. June 8, 1974. The Courier from that week carried a lengthy piece about a proposed highway bypass that would route traffic around Garrow rather than through it. The article detailed community opposition, but in the town council minutes from the same week, I found something else. A motion introduced and passed unanimously to discontinue all municipal surveying operations between the hours of 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. No explanation was recorded. No discussion was noted, just a one-line motion, a unanimous vote, and an adjournment. They'd made it a rule. The town had officially, formally codified Mrs. Padam's second rule into municipal law. January 12, 1983. I almost missed this one. The Courier had nothing relevant. The town council minutes were routine. But in a box of unsorted photographs, I found a Polaroid, labeled on the back in ballpoint pen, 11283, corner of Elm and Birch. The photograph showed an intersection I recognized, except that at the corner, where there should have been a vacant lot, there was a building. A tall, narrow building with dark windows and no visible door. It didn't match any architectural style in Garrow. It looked almost like a watchtower or a monument or a piece of furniture scaled up to the size of a structure. The building was not there now. I'd driven that intersection dozens of times. There was nothing on that corner but grass and a fire hydrant. April 29, 1989. This date I already knew. This was the night Gerald Padham drove 200 miles inside something that wasn't Garrow, and November 28, 2019. That was my night. The night I found the road, the mailbox, the envelope. 6 dates spanning 67 years. 6 events, each involving some intensification of whatever was happening in Garrow. A road repaving itself. A road disappearing. A person finding something on a night road and never speaking of it again. A municipal law against nocturnal surveying. A building that existed in a photograph and nowhere else. A man who drove 200 miles without leaving town. And me. My name in a mailbox on a road that didn't exist. What was the connection? What was the pattern? I spread my notes across the kitchen table and stared at them for an hour while the coffee went cold. And then, slowly, with the reluctant precision of a diagnosis I didn't want to make, I saw it. The dates were not random. They weren't even irregular. They followed a cycle, a long, slow cycle, not lunar, not annual, but something else. Something measured in the gaps between them. 1952 to 1968, 16 years. 1968 to 1974, 6 years. 1974 to 1983, 9 years. 1983 to 1989, 6 years. 1989 to 2019, 30 years. The intervals didn't match any astronomical pattern I could identify. But there was a rhythm to them, a contraction and expansion, like breathing. Long gap, short gap, medium gap, short gap, long gap. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. And if the pattern continued, if the next interval followed the same contraction, then the next date would be approximately 6 years after 2019. I was working this out in December of 2019. I had 6 years. 6 years until whatever was going to happen next. For Frauju, 6 years sounds like a long time. It should have been enough to prepare, to understand, to find answers. Instead, it was exactly enough time to forget, and that, I think, was the point. Life intervened. It does that. In 2020, a pandemic locked everything down, and Nora spent months working overtime at the clinic while I conducted remote surveys from our kitchen table, staring at satellite imagery instead of driving roads. The midnight drive stopped not because of any rule, but because the exhaustion was too deep and the nights felt occupied enough by anxiety without adding mystery to them. In 2021, Nora was offered a partnership at the clinic. We celebrated with a bottle of wine on the porch, watching fireflies drift through the yard like slow, green thoughts. The house on Alden Road felt more like ours than ever. We planted a garden. I built a raised bed for tomatoes. We talked about getting a dog. In 2022, Rick Calburn retired and I was offered his position, county survey supervisor. More desk work, less field work, a modest raise. I took it. I moved into his office with its ancient coffee maker and its road classification poster. I didn't replace either one. The notebook went into a drawer. Mrs. Padham's mother's maps stayed in Mrs. Padham's kitchen. The envelope stayed in my nightstand. I didn't forget. You don't forget something like that. But I let it recede. I let the ordinary days pile up on top of it like snow on a landscape, softening its edges, muting its shape. Garrow was a good town. Have I said that? It bears repeating. The summers were so beautiful they felt personal, like the town was doing it just for you. The 4th of July parade was 2 fire trucks and a riding mower pulling a flatbed, and it was perfect. The autumn lights slanted through the trees on Duluth Street, where all of this began, at an angle that made everything look like a painting of itself. I measured roads during the day. They behaved. They were the lengths they were supposed to be. The asphalt aged and cracked and was repaired according to schedule. The county records were accurate and orderly. Everything was exactly as it should be. I stopped driving at night. Completely. Not consciously, I didn't make a decision. It just happened. I went to bed earlier. I slept more soundly. The midnight hours passed without me, as they do for most people, as they should. Mrs. Padham died in the spring of 2023, 82 years old, peacefully in her own bed in the yellow house on Locust Street. I went to the funeral. Nearly the entire town was there. No one mentioned roads. No one mentioned maps. The pastor talked about her service to the community, her years at the post office, her devotion to her garden. She was buried next to Gerald in the cemetery on the hill. After the service, her niece, Florence's daughter, who'd come from Wisconsin, approached me. "Aunt Eleanor said you might want these," she said, and handed me a box. Inside were the maps, all of them. Decades of Saturday morning surveys, the handwritten record of a town that refused to hold still. I put them in the closet with the notebook, and the years continued and the snow kept falling. And I forgot, and I forgot, and I forgot. It's 2025 now. The 6 years are up, and the roads are doing something they've never done before. By early April, the changes were no longer subtle. Main Street, which had run in a straight line from the roundabout to the town's western limit for as long as anyone could remember, developed a gentle S-curve that hadn't been there the day before. The curve was so graceful, so natural-looking, that if you didn't know the road, you'd swear it had always been that way. But the buildings along Main, the bakery, the hardware store, the library, were still in their original positions. They hadn't moved. The road had simply rerouted around them, like water flowing around stones. Birch Lane, the cul-de-sac I'd been monitoring for years, extended itself by an entire block. 3 new houses appeared at its terminus. Solid, real houses with driveways and mailboxes and lights in the windows. I drove past them slowly. They had house numbers, they had welcome mats. One had a child's bicycle on the front porch. I checked the county records. The houses were listed. They had assessed values, tax histories going back decades, registered owners. I checked the census data. The owners were listed. They had names, ages, occupations. None of it had existed a week ago. I was certain of this. I had surveyed Birch Lane in March. It ended at a cul-de-sac with 9 houses. Now it had 12, and the county records, the tax rolls, the census data, all of it had seamlessly incorporated the new houses as if they'd always been there. I knocked on the door of one of the new houses. A man answered, middle-aged, pleasant face, wearing a sweater vest and holding a book with his thumb marking his place. "Hi," I said. "I'm Elliot Marsh. I'm with County Public Works." "Oh, sure. I know who you are. You live over on Alden, right?" "Yeah. Listen, this is going to sound strange, but how long have you lived here?" He looked puzzled. 14 years, give or take. We moved in when Lily started kindergarten. Why? "Just updating records," I said. "Thanks." He smiled and closed the door. Through the window, I could see him sit down in an armchair and resume reading as if nothing unusual had occurred. 14 years. He believed he'd been there for 14 years. He had memories of 14 years. And yet I had a survey from 3 weeks ago that showed nothing but a cul-de-sac turnaround where his house now stood. The town was growing, adding to itself, and rewriting history to accommodate the additions. I drove to the edges again. Route 9, the main connection to the highway. The highway was gone, not the road. Route 9 still existed. I could drive it eastward for as long as I wanted. But the highway on-ramp, the physical connection to the interstate, was simply not there. The road went on and on, through farmland that looked like Garrow's farmland but slightly wrong. The furrow patterns too regular, the horizon too flat, the sky a shade of blue I'd never seen in Illinois. I drove for 30 minutes without reaching anything. No highway, no other town, no signs, just road and fields and that strange too-flat sky. I turned around. Following the first rule, don't fight it, go with it. It will bring you somewhere familiar. It brought me back to Garrow in 10 minutes. I checked the other exits. County Road 4 South, same thing. Miles of road leading nowhere. Miller Road West, same. Flat fields, empty horizon, no river, no other town, just Garrow and the land around Garrow and nothing else. Garrow had disconnected itself. We were alone. I drove home and found Nora in the kitchen, feeding the dog we'd adopted in 2022, a gentle mutt named Rowan who liked to sleep on my feet. "Nora," I said, "the highways are gone." She looked at me. Then she looked out the window at the street, at the town, at the quiet, ordinary evening outside. "I know," she said. "You know? I drove to the supply depot in Carthage this morning. Except I never got to Carthage. I drove for an hour and the road just kept going through empty fields. I turned around and came home. And you didn't say anything?" "What would I say? Who would I say it to? The whole town is." She paused. Rowan nuzzled her hand. "Everyone I talked to today acted like everything was normal. Mrs. Chen at the bakery, the Hendersons, my staff at the clinic. Nobody mentioned anything unusual. Either they don't notice, or they don't care, or they've already adjusted." We looked at each other across the kitchen. "Elliot," she said, "are we going to forget too?" That was the question. The real question. The one underneath all the measurements and maps and midnight drives. If Garrow could rewrite its roads, its records, its buildings, could it rewrite us? Were our memories reliable? Were we who we thought we were? I opened the nightstand drawer and took out the envelope. I showed her the list of dates. "This is proof," I said. "Physical proof. From outside whatever system the town operates on. I found it on a road that doesn't exist, in a mailbox that was put there for me. If we start to forget, this will remind us." She took the paper and studied it. Then she folded it carefully and put it in her pocket. "Both of us should carry proof," she said, "in case one of us forgets and the other doesn't." We divided the evidence. She took the letter. I took 3 of Mrs. Padham's mother's maps, the ones from 1952, 1968, and 1989. We agreed to check with each other every morning. A ritual, a tether. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stood at the bedroom window, the way Gerald Padham used to stand, watching Locust Street like it was an animal he didn't trust, and I looked out at Alden Road. The road was shifting. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, but I could see it in the moonlight. The asphalt was moving, not buckling, not cracking, flowing like a liquid finding its level. The center line drifted a few inches to the left. The curb on the far side migrated slightly closer. The road was narrowing itself, tightening, compressing. The spaces between the houses were growing wider, and in the distance, at the far end of Alden where it should have intersected with Park Street, there was darkness. Not the ordinary darkness of a street with its lights out. A complete solid darkness, an absence, as if the road simply ended and there was nothing beyond it. I watched for an hour. The darkness didn't move. The road continued its slow, liquid adjustment. Rowan slept at the foot of the bed, undisturbed. Nora breathed softly beside me. Garrow was finishing its transformation, becoming whatever it was becoming, and in the morning I knew the town would look normal, and the records would be updated, and the people would have memories that fit the new configuration, and maybe Nora and I would too. Maybe we'd wake up and the highways would never have existed, and Carthage would be a word that meant nothing, and the world outside Garrow would be a concept we'd never had reason to consider. Or maybe we'd remember, like Mrs. Padham's grandmother, like Florence, like the handful of people across the decades who had looked at the changing roads and refused to look away. I don't know which possibility frightens me more. It's morning now, April. The light through the kitchen window is warm and golden, and Nora is making coffee, and Rowan is lying on my feet under the table. Everything looks normal, everything feels normal, and that's what scares me the most. I still have the maps. I checked this morning. The notebook is in the drawer. The dates are in Nora's pocket. We looked at each other over breakfast, and we both remembered, and we said the words out loud. Garrow, the roads, the changes. Just to hear them, just to make them real in the air between us. I drove to work today on roads that looked exactly right. The correct lengths, the correct curves, the correct intersections, but the highway still isn't there. And this afternoon, checking the county database, I found that Carthage, the town 20 miles east where Nora used to drive for veterinary supplies, doesn't appear in any record. No census data, no tax records, no map listing. When I searched for it online, the search returned nothing, as if it had never existed. I asked Nora if she remembered the supply depot she used to drive to. She paused, a long, uncertain pause, and then she said yes. She remembered a depot, but she wasn't sure where it had been. Not Carthage. Carthage didn't sound right. Maybe it was in town. Maybe it had always been in town. She was forgetting. I showed her the list of dates from her pocket. She read them. She recognized her own handwriting on one of the annotations, and something in her eyes flickered like a light catching on a surface that's trying to go dark. And she said very quietly, "Elliot, don't let me forget. I won't. I'm going to record everything I know. Write it down. Say it out loud. Put it somewhere the town can't reach." That's what this is. This story, this document, this whatever you want to call it. My name is Elliot Marsh. I live in Garrow, Illinois. The town is real. The roads change. They've always changed. And now the changes are permanent. And the world outside is disappearing. And the people inside are forgetting. and I don't know how much longer I'll remember any of this. But right now, tonight, I remember. The town is quiet. Rowan is sleeping. Nora is reading in the armchair, and every few minutes she touches the envelope in her pocket. And I know she's checking, the way you check for your keys, or your wallet, or anything small and essential that you can't afford to lose. Outside, the streetlights hum. The road looks the same as it always has. The houses sit in their places. The trees are beginning to leaf out in that pale, tentative green that means spring is deciding to commit. If you've ever driven through a small town in Illinois, blinked and almost missed it, thought I could live here and then kept driving, maybe it was Garrow, maybe you passed through before it closed. Maybe the highway on-ramp that brought you through is the same one that no longer exists. If so, I need you to do something for me. Remember us. Not the details, the dates, the measurements, the rules. Those are for me. But remember that there was a town here. A good town. With a bakery and a library and a hardware store and a woman who grew carnations in her window box. Remember that people lived here and were happy. Remember that the light in autumn was extraordinary. Remember that the roads were strange. And if you're ever driving somewhere late at night and the road bends in a direction it shouldn't, and the distance between the lights seems wider than it ought to be, trust the road. It knows where it's going, even if you don't.